Yeah, there's so much good there. Wow. So one of the things that I noticed about the comments of viewers, one of the most common comments that I get from somebody who's just stumbled onto my channel is these conversations are so refreshing because they've been out in the rest of the internet, right? Where
Mhm.
sometimes you listen to something and you might be very engaged by it, but it's exhausting because it's ramping you from one side to the other of your limbic system on the whole way through the conversation. And you get to the end of it and you're just, you want to go take a nap or something. And the other funny thing that happened very early on with my channel was I had a couple of conversations from the very beginning with a guy who was a geologist and who had done quite a lot of work in geophysics. And he contacted me when I was on Paul's, and Paul suggested that I should start a channel. So this geologist contacted me and he said, I'll be your first guest. He said, you want to talk to me? So, and he was very, very interesting to talk to because the two of us didn't have any contact points really. And we were both talking a little bit outside our own frame because he was trying to talk about quantum physics, even though that's not his field. And I was trying to engage with him on that level, and I didn't know anything. And Michael, who later became a frequent contributor to my channel, he made a comment on some of those videos, and he said, the most fascinating thing about these videos is neither one of you really know what you're talking about. But what happens is the conversation leaves this space in between that makes me think about so many things. And so it left his mind free to roam through this kind of edge space. I don't know if you've ever heard me talk about the importance of edges in painting, but the edges are where you leave room for the viewer to use their imaginations, to try to come up with their own story. If the edges aren't meeting, if the edges aren't sharp, then there's something left kind of unfinished there. And that's kind of what you're doing with your documentary too. You're leaving little tidbits. You bring in a little 2-second clip and then a 5-second clip, and there's little, well, what's the connection to those two? And that leaves room for the viewer to kind of respond inside their own imagination to make the connections, right? So and then the other thing you said was they were they were locked into that box, that rigid ideological political box in their conversations. And one of the things that I like to talk about on my channel is the problem that has happened with science in the last many, many years is that science has kind of gotten locked into a box. And us, in many ways, each of the specialists have their own little silo, and they don't always see what the other specialists are working on. And so there's a lot of questions that they're not asking. Or maybe there's questions that they're not allowed to ask because of the academic environment or the people who are providing the grant money. And kind of open that up a little bit and let people take a look at it.
Oh, yeah, that's so true. I've noticed because as I said before, I was somewhat addicted to higher education for a period of my life, and I wound up getting my master's in philosophy down at Long Beach State here, and I did it on the side while I was working. Um, and I noticed a curious phenomenon, and it was that every one of those professors was a specialist in a certain area of philosophy, religion, epistemology, metaphysics, modal logic, whatever it was, right? But they didn't, and they would always say, oh, no, I'm sorry, I'm not an expert in that other area. You got to talk to somebody else about that, right? Everybody was an expert on one little thing because that's what you do for your dissertation. You have to know more than everybody about that one little subject so you can be an expert, right? But then the weird thing is that in all of that expertise, I would say maybe wisdom is lost. Wisdom in the sense of what do you do? Just practical, how do you live your life, right? So
Mhm.
I noticed that I had a lot of undergraduates in my graduate classes, because so we would have a little extra assignments as graduates, and there would also be undergraduates in the class. So these were, by this time I was probably late 20s. So I was a bit more mature. And then these were all, 18, 19, 20 year olds. And they were having to put together all of this niche expertise into a system for them to be able to live their life, you might say. And it was totally incoherent. The way that they would take something from this professor, which is like needed to have all of these caveats attached to it and everything like that. And then one from this professor from a totally different tradition, totally different school of philosophy, try to put those together. And they're incompatible. They're, as Thomas Kuhn says, they're incommensurate sort of things, right?
Uh-huh.
And it's like, I just was looking at him going, good heavens, like you are so confused. And I became kind of a little voice of wisdom to them, because I was like, could understand a little bit more of what each professor was saying. And so I'd be able to kind of put a little bit of it together. And, but if you think of that as a culture-wide problem of all of these experts on one little tiny thing, but nobody willing to talk about anything else besides that one thing that they're an expert on, for fear of not being qualified or something like that, so you like the C.S. Lewis types that would write about anything, or weigh in on anything, or the public intellectual types, the people that you'd say, well, you know what, whatever that person thinks about it, how they process through a problem is something that I trust. And so if I'm confused, I'm going to go to that person. Like that kind of a sense of a wisdom figure or a mentorish figure is increasingly rare today, I think, because of that weird phenomenon in higher education. Maybe I'm not sure what the symptomology of it is.